Okay, we're going to start this out with a quick 3-question quiz. Question number 1. Within the last few months, have you been in a meeting and gotten an action step that you need to take, but before you can take action on it, before it somehow finds its way to your to-do list, the idea has fluttered away, never to be seen again? Or has some sort of creative inspiration come to you, something for a novel or a business, and you know this idea is gold, but the next day, you don't quite remember it enough to put your finger on it, so you just let it go. Question number 3, do you actually write things down, but you have notes all over your house, sticky notes, different notepads, different digital ways of organizing things you've tried, and just nothing seems to stick? If you answered yes to any of these questions, this episode is definitely for you. And even if you didn't, I hope you stick around, especially if you like organization or just like getting different tips, because as we'll cover in this episode, I'm going to share with you my system for organizing ideas, events, tasks. I'm going to discuss some philosophical, psychological frameworks for thinking about how to organize what might feel like a mess in your mind right now. You might be thinking, who are you and why should I listen to you? My name is Pamela, and I post every week on different topics examined through a psychological lens. But the reason why you might want to listen to me on organization is because I am the friend that people will often ask, hey, could we get coffee and you help me organize my life? I have had many coffees with friends where I just help them develop systems with a calendar or a to-do list. And you might already do that stuff already, so don't worry, it's not going to stay really basic. But if you don't have those systems in place, no judgment or guilt here as well. But this is important because your idea, it could be the best. It could change the world, but it won't do anything if it's in a crumpled up piece of paper that fell behind your dresser. So let's jump in. So the main reason that we do not want to try to hold everything that we need to do or remember in our mind at once is this idea called working memory capacity. This is basically the limit on how much information we can keep in mind and work with in the short term. For example, trying to remember a telephone number. Some studies suggest working memory holds around 3 to 5 items. Older studies offered 7 plus or minus 2, but the specific number isn't the point. What matters is that working memory is finite. And to go further with this, these studies are often measuring if people can remember things like chunks of words, not separate long lists of things on their to-do lists, meetings, or all the things we have going on in our lives that are even less related. We need to outsource these items to a system we can trust. And a lot of what we're going to talk about here pulls from David Allen's work, Getting Things Done, which I will link below. And he talks about, and this idea was not his own, it comes from martial arts, but he talks about mind like water, which is the idea that water takes the shape of whatever is called upon it in the moment. If it is poured into a cup, it becomes the cup. If someone is facing a lake and they throw a rock into it, there are ripples, but then they die back down and the water goes back to stillness. And when our mind is like water, it can become adaptable and flexible and be whatever is called upon it in the moment. But if you're trying to, let's just go with the number 5. It's sort of in between that 3 to 5 that I saw, the 7 plus or minus 2. Let's go with 5. Let's say you can keep about 5 things in your mind at once. If you're trying to remember, oh yeah, in the meeting, they said that we're going to move next week's meeting from 12 to 1. And you're trying to keep that in mind. And you need to pick up your daughter from daycare a little bit early. And your boss said that he actually wants you to make that report a little bit shorter. And your husband said that he can't pick up dinner, so you need to actually pick it up on the way home. And oh, is that already 4? Well, then how are you going to be present with anything in front of you right now if you're trying to keep all of this in our head? Now, my belief and framework is operating under the idea that you can be a lot more present for whatever's in front of you, for that meeting, for your loved ones, for the sport you're playing, for the art you're creating, and whatever you're trying to do. You can show up more at 100%, more focused when you don't have to try to store all this other stuff in your mind. The analogy I like for this is RAM. We all know that our computer can only do so much, or at a certain point we're expecting too much of it and it starts to work slower or have little issues. It only has so much RAM. Funnily enough, that means random access memory in computers. But we often don't think that this applies to ourselves. So how do we tame this chaos? Because like we talked about, if we can only store so much in here, balls are going to be dropped if we don't have a place in a system. So let's take some of those examples. I think it's important, first of all, to separate out what is a task, what is a reminder, what is an event, and then what is an idea or some other bit of information that needs to go to the right spot. For instance, a task might go on a to-do list, but a reminder maybe goes in your reminders app. For instance, Apple has that sends you a nudge at a certain time, such as in my case, I have a strength coaching business. Oh, send Janine that reminder text to do her workout homework on Wednesday. As much as I love this imaginary client, Janine, that I'm saying off the top of my head right now, I will not probably think to text her Wednesday without that little reminder nudge. So I use that app, but there might be others. Maybe you have an alarm on your phone, or maybe you have another system, but that is a reminder, which is different than a task that goes into a to-do list that might happen at a separate time. The next category that I mentioned is an event, such as a meeting. That meeting that we talked about next week that's going to be moved from 12 to 1. That would be in some sort of a calendar system. Now, everyone has very strong opinions on this, understandably, because I think that our brains work really different for different types of layouts, digital versus print, week view versus month view, day view, or a combination of which. That's why there's whole channels dedicated to which planner is right for you, because I think that some people psychologically really gravitate towards certain systems, and that's where it's about finding what works for you. But it is realizing something that needs to happen on a certain day at a certain time with a certain person, that's really different than a to-do list. And you might already know this, but I will say a lot of the people that struggle with organizing things, I think they skip this step of what's an event, what's a reminder, what goes on my to-do list. Within a to-do list, where does it go based on what project it is in? And really the inspiration for this was actually about how to sort ideas, which I promise we will get to. Because let's say that you had that idea for a creative project and you write it down, and you don't know where to put it, that can make things really overwhelming too, because then it's just a sticky note floating on your desk, and what do you do next with it, or what if you lose it? So I'll tell you what I do, and this is where we are pulling from David Allen's work. And by the way, I realize I'm jumping around a little bit, but I really will sync this up at the end into what I would consider a framework. But I want you to really understand the philosophy behind it first. So with ideas, we want to think of it in 3 steps. Now, I'm simplifying his system quite a bit, and I'm also adapting it to the modern world. I think I looked at his book a long time ago, and I don't use all of his file folders that he recommends, but I love his idea of full capture. So full capture is where we take, again, the everything that is bouncing around in your head. So remember that initial example where we talked about you got to pick up dinner on the way home and something with the kid I don't even remember because, my working memory of 4 things, it's gone. I've talked about a lot of stuff since then. And then the moving the meeting from 12 to 1. Oh yeah, and your boss wanted the report to be a bit shorter, all that stuff. You can do a massive brain dump, and oh my goodness, you are going to feel so much better after this. Sorry, that sounds kind of vulgar. You're going to feel way better after a dump. But okay, after a brain dump, you just feel so much mental clarity because all this stuff, let's say that I know people that have done a brain dump and had maybe 2 pages of written text in a Word doc because there's just so much that they have. For example, someone maybe got married a year ago and they know that they need to redo their will, but they just haven't gotten around to it. Or something boring like cleaning the radiator because it kicks up a bunch of dust and aggravates your allergies, but you just haven't done it yet. These are things that you don't need to do today or even necessarily this week, but they are a task. So where do they go? A mentor of mine taught me about a quote later list where I think she even called hers her wish list, which is kind of sweet. And it has all of these different items that are going to happen, but we don't want them taking up our mental bandwidth by having them on today's to-do list. And someone else showed me a framework where they basically break down their list by time. So the top is today. Underneath that is this week. The next list under that, by the way, I have this up on the screen if you are watching the video version. Underneath that are tasks that are the next several weeks or 1 to 2 months. And then things that are later past that, not even within the next couple months. For example, maybe you can't get around to going to the dentist in the next few months, but you plan to go within the next 6 months and you need to make that appointment. That might go later down on the list. Getting back to that more urgent client email, that might go this week, but it doesn't necessarily have to be today. So you'll be able to file things as they come in during your sorting time into when do they need to go on this timeline. The point is, though, is that by getting all this stuff out in a brain dump, whether it's stuff that needs to go on your calendar, whether it's an idea you had, whether it's the dozens of things that you need to do, but not right now, that mental load that you were carrying, you've just set it down. You set it down. Wow. I just felt my shoulders drop a little bit picturing that for you. So, you know what? If you want an activity, you can pause this actually and do this right now. And to make it less intimidating, I would say set a timer for 15 minutes. You can use a pen and paper or you can use digital and just get everything out of your head. Do not worry about what to do with the information. Do not worry about categorizing it. Just get out everything in your head. We're not journaling right now. You're not just writing emotions and stuff like that. That's great. Do that another time. But you are writing down stuff that you feel like needs to happen or that you need to remember to act on at a later time. It generally should have some sort of action component, even if you don't know how you might act on it at this time. Or you might just do it at the end of this video. So let's keep going. Okay, so the next step is sorting. This is where we're going to sort into those different categories. You can put some of them in a task. Don't worry right now if that task is a part of a project or not. Just if it's a task that does not need to happen at a certain time, put it under tasks. Next, you're going to have a category for reminders. This could even be something that maybe you do regularly. Like, let's say that you do your laundry every Thursday and you don't want to have that in your to-do list clogging it up. So maybe you just have a reminder every Wednesday night to gather your laundry up to take it to the laundromat on Thursday or something like that. So you could have a reminders section, kind of like my example of contacting the client on Wednesday to make sure that they did their strength homework. Then you're going to have a section for events. This is stuff that will go into the calendar system later. You don't have to do that yet, but you'll do it right after this. And then a section for ideas or miscellaneous. The fifth section could be, you could have a project section under the task area because depending on your work, we might sort your stuff into projects. If you want, you can pause and do that right now. If not, we'll keep going and you can do it later. Probably the easiest thing to do next is to put all of the events into your calendar and then add all of your reminders into a reminder system. Now, for some people, their reminders are synced with their calendar because there is a way that you can set a reoccurring event in your calendar, like maybe pay rent on the 29th, and you set that to alert you. And so you put that in your calendar too. I know someone that's done it that way. That's another example of there are many ways to do this and find what works for you. But there's certain, I think, principles that apply no matter what your system is. Let's talk about where you are putting things as they come up midday. This is a system that we want to work mid-flight, not just on the runway before you take off. So let's go with a certain example. Maybe you are seeing the doctor for some strange symptoms that you're having, and you don't quite know how to describe it, and you know you're going to get there and have no idea how to explain this to them, and it's going to be embarrassing and not helpful, and you're going to leave annoyed. What you could do is write down the symptoms that you're having, and then we will find a way to remind you of them at the relevant time when you're seeing the doctor. So right now, you did this brain dump in a certain place. Maybe it was a piece of paper, maybe it was a Google Doc, maybe it was Apple Notes, maybe it was the back of your planner where you have some blank lines. This could be a dropping place for you, but we do need a dropping place before we can organize stuff. I think this would be most simple as a flow chart, and we're going to go through the different phases that information could take. First, we have something coming inbound. In the meeting, you're hearing from your boss, we're moving the meeting from 12 to 1 next week. This goes somewhere. It could either go directly into your planner or calendar if you're able to move it in the moment, or if you're not, it's going to some sort of base system landing pad area that you have. This is the full capture. We're getting everything. If you only get 75%, you're only going to 75% trust yourself and trust the system. So maybe this is a notepad you have in the meeting. wherever it is, you're getting whatever you need down. Then during your sorting time, which we will talk about having that, I recommend having about 15 minutes either at the end of the day or the start of the next day where you're sorting different things from that home base dropping point. Otherwise, it starts to really pile up and get overwhelming and take a really long time to sort. Trust me, I've been there. When you have an 8 or 9 page Google Doc of a bunch of random stuff that you've dropped there, it can be pretty intimidating to sort. But then it feels great after you're done and you know everything's in its place. If you stay ahead of it, though, if you do this every day, it might only just be 2/3 of a page of a Google Doc. And mine's a little bit longer sometimes because I'm writing down a lot of ideas I have, maybe for episodes for the show. For instance, next week is on a climate change film festival that I went to and different observations I had there. So if something pops into my head for that, then I write it down in the Google Doc. Again, not sorting it, I'm just dropping it there and I can sort it at the end of the day. But when you're a writer, and maybe some of you listening to this are, you really want to capture those ideas when they come to you. Maybe they're good, maybe they're not. It's not really the time to evaluate, but it's really nice to be able to jot it down so you know you have it. Which brings us to sorting ideas. Now, these could be ideas such as creative projects or business ventures like we talked about, but it could even be something as simple as an idea of what you want to get someone for their birthday, or even something such as a book you want to read or something you want to apply to your budget later. So I'm realizing this could come across really nerdy to some people, but that's okay. So this is where you get to be creative and find what works for you. I have an Apple Note with books that I've read this year and books that I want to read coming up. So if someone tells me a good book, goes in the dropping place, and then during the sorting time, I sort it to that area. I have a sheet where I track my finances. So if I have certain spending notes that I want to note for that day, I drop it in the Google Doc, and then later it goes in the Excel sheet. If I think of something that I want to get a family member for their birthday, I put it in the Google Doc, and then later I put it in my different Google Doc, which has gift ideas for loved ones. So you don't have to have all these separate areas, but I think it's about finding where are you going to look for this when you need that information so that you can recall it later. Because we're dropping it, we're sorting it, and then we do need to recall it and use it. Otherwise, there's no point in this. And this is why a lot of people lose trust in their system, because they don't actually get to the final phase of using that information when they need it, trusting it'll be there, so then they don't use it, so then they have less trust in it, and it can become sort of a cycle. So let's do a practical example to examine these two stages of sorting something to a place and then recalling and using it at the optimal time. We'll use the taking notes to go to the doctor's office example that we talked about before. You can use whatever note-taking software you like. Again, a lot of people gravitate towards either the Google Docs system or Apple Notes, but there's others. Some people use Trello boards, Notions. Again, our analog friends, we love you. Whatever works for you. But my preference is using in my calendar, there's usually if you click on it, there's a notes area where you can add more notes. And then in my digital calendar, I'll put questions for my doctor. For instance, Tuesday, I'm seeing an ENT and I have about 4 separate questions. Yes, doctors love seeing me. I'm kidding. I am respectful of their time, but it's about maximizing that time and also so that the doctor can better help you too. But again, that's just one very niche example, but that applies to almost everything that you're doing. Now, this begs the question, what's something that you just jotted down randomly? Maybe an epiphany you had or something that you felt like writing down, or scratch notes for something you're working on now that you don't really need later, versus something that you need to act on that later. I'm usually asking the question, is this actionable? If I'm in a session with a client and I'm taking notes, sometimes I'll put a little star next to something that's actionable, such as, oh yeah, I need to send them that article on protein, versus the strength program that we're following that day. That is not as important. As soon as I finish, of course, I'll update the weights, but then after that, it gets filed away and I move on. But if there's an asterisk next to something, I know, as I'm putting this in the client file, grab that item and put it in my to-do list. And now back to our last couple ideas here. When it comes to sorting these ideas, if you do find that it's journaling or even an epiphany you had and you want to recall that later, maybe it's a breakthrough that you found really helpful from therapy. Maybe you have an area you store your therapy notes. When it comes to the sorting phase, ideally everything has a place. There's an idea in the home organizational world that everything has a place. And maybe you have a limited amount of things that go in sort of like a junk drawer near the front of your house, like your keys or other things you want to reference. And sure, that's fine. But generally, everything has a place. Otherwise, it's sort of just floating around or you don't know where to look for it later. It's the same idea with our mental frameworks. So when it comes to sorting ideas for this show, let's now get to projects. I have hundreds of Apple Notes of different future episodes that I want to do. Some of them are more baked that I have in one section, and it's basically the start of an outline. And some of them are just, oh, that's an interesting idea. I wonder if I can work that into something. And then that goes into a separate section, but each of them has their own file. And this is something that's always evolving. For instance, I recently brought a producer onto the show, and then my editor and I have started working together again. So there is a bit more of a team aspect, which means I'm going to need to change certain parts of my system to make sense to other people. Having a shared Google Doc with each tab being the episodes we're currently working on, or having my own to-do list of stuff that I need to do to move the show forward. Talking to someone on branding. I'm thinking of changing the name of the podcast and redoing the artwork. So that means I need to hire someone, which means I need to research someone. One tip for your to-do list too is it should be a very clear next action. So in that example, it can overwhelm myself or anyone to just see fix branding for the show versus look up branding experts. That's a very clear task. That would be the next action step I would take. And so for whatever is on your to-do list, if it's something that stayed there for a few days, of course you can ask, does it really need to get done? Or should I move it to my later area? Or am I unclear on the next actual step that I need to take? And that's something you can do too. Now, let's say you wear multiple hats. And so this goes back to the whole project standpoint. I think that if you have a certain time you know you're working on something, then maybe having an area that you have all of the items to do for that makes sense. If you work as an adjunct professor, you might have a separate list of all the things you need to do for that, such as lesson planning for your next class. And you know when you sit down to have your office hours, that's a task that you're working on. And you might not mix that with your personal to-do list. However, for some people like myself, occasionally I will have a bunch of different things from different hats I wear on my main to-do list, because if I had separate to-do lists for each hat I wear, I have 3 different areas that I exert myself creatively and professionally, something would definitely fall through the cracks. I might forget that I had to get back to some director for an acting project if I'm only looking at a to-do list for my personal training clients and the show. So by integrating most of my tasks that need to happen in the near future, in like today, in one to-do list, for me, that makes more sense. But other people will break it down by the hat they're wearing or certain office hours that they work on different projects. But it's again about knowing where to turn at the certain time. And I'll finish with an example that ties a lot of this together. I was working on a project with a friend a while ago where we were writing different material. And often they would have a really good idea for something. So I would say, oh yeah, add that to the list. And then they would say, yeah, I added it to the list. And then this happened for a while, I think 1 to 2 months before we could actually get together and work on our writing. So we get together and I said, pull out the list. I'm excited to see all the stuff you've come up with, because they're so creative. This friend is really humorous, really creative. And they said, I don't have a list. And I said, you kept saying you added it to the list. And then they said, yeah, I meant like in my head, like I kind of had a list. Like I kind of knew in my head the ideas that I was coming up with. And I was appalled. Eventually it became a joke we laugh about, like the list, like does it exist? And we didn't rhyme like that, but it just, they could even understand how sort of ridiculous it sounded for them to say, yeah, I added it to it when they didn't. But for them, they weren't in the habit of writing stuff down. So it all seemed very hypothetical to them, like adding it to some list. And that's really relatable. I think all of us can improve in different areas with this. While I love organizations, the area I am trying to improve upon is the project area because I wear different hats. And for instance, right now, I'll tell you an area I'm working on to make this a little bit more relatable, and then we'll close out. So I mentioned that I have a Google Doc with my producer where we break down the different episodes. I also have other stuff such as, timeline of other things we might have coming down the pipeline, to-do lists, all of that for everything for the show. But then I also have a different Google Doc from before I started working with her that's very sprawling with different stuff because I've been working on this project for a while before I brought her on board. And so I have different tabs within this prior Google Doc, and it has website edits. It has templates, for instance, for descriptions. It has marketing stuff. It has reminders. It has ideas to sort because I'm not perfect with sorting these, but I at least have all the stuff for the show in one place. It has production flow timelines. It has a lot, and it's broken down by tabs within the Google Doc. So is it organized? In a way, yes, but something I'm going to do tomorrow is sit down and synthesize a lot of the stuff that just gotten dropped there in a busy time and kind of organize what does my producer need to know, what should go in the shared doc, what should go in the one just for myself, what needs to go into my to-do list for the next 1 to 2 weeks that's actionable, because that's something that has happening is I'm pulling things from this and dropping it into my to-do list. That's the system that works for me. Oh my gosh, I realize this could sound really confusing, but I really hope you got something that you could apply out of it, whether it's just the idea of full capture, getting everything out of your head, whether it's the idea of building trust with yourself, because maybe you never thought about self-trust with a system. And so the idea of the more you use it and become consistent, you'll trust yourself to use it becomes a positive cycle. Maybe it was the idea of separating tasks, projects, events, reminders, and ideas. Maybe it was just the idea of having time to sort things at the end of the day or the next day so that things don't pile up. And maybe it was the idea of having a dropping place and, full capture, sorting time, recall of just conceptualizing it that way. I do think that there was probably something you could apply from this, even if my specific system might have seemed a little bit random or overwhelming. I think that that's the thing. When I keep saying find what works for you, I truthfully think almost anyone else's system will seem a little bit strange to someone else because this is so psychological. There's something that you've done that's probably worked, and let's keep that. And let's find the areas where there's holes and issues with your system and refine that. And that's how you end up with this blueprint, this framework that's perfect for you that might not make sense to anyone else. I would love to hear what works for you. If you want, you can comment on YouTube or you can write or call into the show. I will have that linked below. That's a new feature we have, and I might include your thoughts on a future episode. And either way, I love to hear from you. If you enjoy the show and you are not subscribed on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you are, you can hit subscribe, and that helps make the show a little more likely to appear in your feed in the future. Speak with you next week. We explore a different topic each week, but always through a psychological or philosophical lens.